pase, pierna derecha, directo al arco, ¡golazo! ¡Golazo!
The world of football with a soccer perspective. This is Soccer Today with Duane, Rollins and Kevin Laramee, live on the Sports Podcasting Network.
And welcome to Soccer Today. It's Friday. We always give a little thank you to Grant. Grant, it's been a long time since you've been on the show, but thank you again for this beautiful, cold Friday. Duane, it's been an emotional week. It's been a tough week. And, well, there's one subject that we didn't talk about, but it's kind of fitting to talk about today to bookend the week in ASL.
Yeah, look, Major League Soccer, not Major League Soccer, I should say the USSF, despite the failure to get to the World Cup, obviously, the world ticks on, and they have fired back with they had to do this. Their lawyers put their filing in response to the lawsuit that was put forth by the NASL. Now, a couple caveats before we get into the details of this, Kevin. That this is a normal procedure in a legal setting for the people who are being sued to respond to the claims. Obviously, that's part of the defensive, the part of the whole litigation that takes place. Also, they're asking for the suit to be sort of thrown out on its merits. And again, this is normal operating procedures here. It doesn't necessarily mean when a company or when an organization asks for a judge to throw a case out that's been laid against them before it even makes trial. That's not to say that means that there's less merit to that filing. That's just standard. Every lawyer on earth does it, right? You want to try and cut things off at the pass. That said, there are several points that they put forth, and some of them do kind of ring really true to those of us that follow this game really quickly. Shall we just go through the points and have a little chat about them, Kevin?
Go ahead.
All right. The first point that encountered to the NASL lawsuit, in which we saw, which had several hundred clauses to it, several hundred little details. The first sort of main thing that USSF has fired back with is that the NASL has never met standards. Specifically, the language they used was NASL concedes that it did not meet the professional league standards for Division II status. Indeed, it has failed to do so almost every year since it began operation in 2011. So that's point one, Kevin. That is a pretty strong, compelling thing to me. If you're never meeting the standards that were there before, then certainly, what is your argument that you're trying to exceed those standards?
Well, yeah, and if you remember, just a week ago, last week actually, USL mentioned that it will not have any waivers for their team this year. Well, NASL had waivers from the beginning of their existence, basically. Never really satisfying all the components that was used to make Division II, like the standards that USSF had, like the size of the stadium, over 5,000, and the amount of infrastructures and the amount of investment and office organization, like the organization of like the hierarchy of the group, like everything surrounding the business model of the team. Those are standards that USSF has for Division II, Division III. That's what they base themselves for putting that label, even though we don't necessarily feel that label is important, but that's what they used in the past. And USL as well last year had to ask for some waivers to have that Division II sanctioning, because a few teams, around 5 or 6, were not meeting the criteria of a Division II. But let's not forget, NASL never truly met those criteria. Just go back to the 5,000 stadium and more. This is not the case in the NASL, and the majority of the cases now.
Yeah, they also, one of the ones that doesn't get talked about a lot, but is equally important when you're talking about a Division II league, is that USSF requires that Division II leagues be national, that they exist in, I believe, all but one. They allow one time zone to be sort of out of the mix, and NASL really had large gaps in the country where they were sort of, and that sort of speaks to some of their mistakes they made too, trying to meet that one. That's why they, put a team in Oklahoma City, basically, even though there was a USL team already, because that met one of their time zones. It's why they're desperate to get into California is to meet those standards, and without that, your regional league, and that's fine. There's room for regional leagues, but they're D3, and certainly that's another area there. All right, the second point that the USSF made in counter to the NASL suit was the alleged conspiracy, and this one's a big one. So let's just take a second, make sure that we're listening carefully if we're sort of distracted while we're listening to the podcast here, folks. The alleged conspiracy started before the new NASL existed. The exact wording is, but the undisputed facts, which are subject to judicial note, are that the professional league standards, the NASL challenges, were developed 15 years before NASL was formed. How can you have a conspiracy against something that doesn't exist, Kevin?
How can you prove it? That's why. How can you prove a conspiracy with that one doesn't. That one they raise a good point. Like this one, the MLS lawyers, they're raising a good point.
Yeah,
USSF lawyers, we should say, by the way, because it's not just MLS; it's United States Soccer Federation with Major League Soccer.
Yeah. Well, MLS is the beneficiary in NASL's words, but yes. Look, the argument, I guess, to play devil's advocate to that from an NASL perspective, the argument they would be making would be the NASL in name has only existed for since 2011, but they existed in other forms. The A-League, what was USL, which now, of course, is a partner and a opponent to them, I should say. They've existed in different ways for those 15 years, and they will probably make the argument in court that it's not just about NASL as it currently exists, but about Division II and these owners that existed and whether they're calling them somethings and whether they formed or they had to form in 2011 to try and fight back against this conspiracy. I mean, they'll use arguments like that, but they're spurious a bit, right? So this is going to be something that that's going to be a challenge for them. All right, the third point in this is that is the waivers. The exact wording is, and of course, the USSF if the USSF were bent on driving the NASL out of business, why is it given the NASL yearly waivers to allow it to participate as a Division II league and thereby assist NASL in trying to grow? That was a mouthful for me to read, but nonetheless, basically what they're saying is that if they were trying to drive them out of business, they wouldn't have allowed them to continue to exist in Division II for as long as they did, considering they're never meeting the standards, Kevin.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense, and you can't really say, look, you conspired against us, but you actually helped us by always accepting the waivers we were asking you in the last few years because we didn't meet your criteria. Yeah, you can't have the bread and the butter. That's it's a French expression. You can't have the butter and then want to have the butter and the churn and everything. So no, it doesn't work that way.
No, precisely, and that claim goes on. Despite multiple chances, NASL has not even come up with a plan to for eventual compliance with the Division II standards. So it's not like they're saying they came with them this year and said, look, I know we're not quite there, but we're doing X here, we're doing Y there, we're going to do this, and by next year or even by 2020, we're going to meet them. This is sort of the claim here. Now, we don't know what and USSF's sort of thinking would be on this front. We don't know whether they would have been accepting of something like that, but the fact that there's no plan in place is something that really is troubling for this. All right, there's another, the motion continues on this, and I should give Richard Farley credit for unearthing this and writing this up in 442, which is where you can read this in its entirety. In fact, you can read the entire claim. 442 got a hold of it. And again, Richard Farley was the journalist who did that. In the claim specifically, it goes on to say the USSF conditioned the waivers on the NASL growing its league and coming into actual compliance with the acceptable standards. This has not happened. In fact, while other leagues like Major League Soccer Division I and the United Soccer League, once Division III, now Division II, have flourished in recent years, NASL has declined. And can we ever really argue that the NASL hasn't declined? No, of course we can. I don't think they are, because they're arguing that they're declining because they're not getting the opportunity to compete for the top, Kevin.
Yeah, no, it's a weird situation. What does it matter anyways? D3, D2, D4, D10, D5, bingo, it doesn't really matter. But, NASL continues on, and we have the Deltas clinching a playoff spot. So, a postseason spot. That's interesting. Keeping an eye on the Deltas, because we all are aware of the back room conversation for the last few months now. Money problems, especially fan problem, not having the success that they would have hoped, and the few letters that some players apparently, but the letters that we actually saw addressed to fans and season ticket holders saying, look, bring a friend, help us out. It's not looking good for the Delta. So I'm keeping an eye because, of course, the Canadian content with the Delta is high. Mark Dos Santos has head coach. And it's interesting. Last week, I can't remember if it was on Yahoo or another outlet, Mark Dos Santos has an interview talking about, we're closing our locker room door. We're not paying attention to whatever's going on outside the locker room. We're really focused on the locker room and having success. I wouldn't be surprised if they actually maybe have success in the playoff. Mark Dos Santos in his career had a great success in playoff settings in different leagues, so I wouldn't be surprised to see the Deltas maybe go on a one and done. Who knows? You get the championship and bye-bye.
That would be very NASL and MDS. Obviously, I had a whole Twitter exchange yesterday. I believe it was Steven Sandor that had that article that you're referring to. There's a couple more points in the lawsuit. We'll just quickly go through in the last couple minutes of this block, though. The NASL was never really ready for the prime or for the top level is another point that the USSF is making. The NASL's failure to even attempt to plead intent and preparedness to enter the market for top-tier professional soccer is fatal to the majority of its claims. We've not much to talk about there, so we'll move on. But a big one here, and this is something that Bo Durr first got out there and is included in this indeed, is that they're not even trying to be second division anymore. The USS board determining enough is enough and denied the NASL Division II sanction for 2018, but gave NASL 30 days to apply for Division III status, a deadline the NASL ignored. So that's an interesting status, and there's evidence now. There's actual, well, it's not evidence. It's been stated that they failed to apply to Division III. So it does seem, Kevin, that one and done might imply that this is true. Itself, that there might not be a league next year if they haven't even asked for sanctioning for D3, because if they don't get sanctioning and the deadline's passed, then the USSF is not going to be in a mood to extend them some kind of like olive branch now, right?
No, unless but
this whole
lawsuit thing could be just to get some time, could be to maybe get a few months. All right, we're not in gear now to ask for D2, D3, even D4 sanctioning, but let's sue them for not giving us D2, and by the time we get to court in a few months' time, maybe we'll be ready for us for at least D3, and maybe at that point, like off court, just before you make an agreement saying, look, okay, give us D3 and we'll be fine. Maybe that's the end goal of this lawsuit, because to be quite fair, if you're looking at this objectively, there's no way the resolution of this lawsuit is an ASL with a D2 sanctioning at all.
No, probably no. I that would be, or the other lawsuit. I don't think there's any way it's pro rel. It's all about attention, really. But I'm not a lawyer, but I play one on a podcast sometimes, and I think what we're probably going to see here, Kevin, is that the NASL, what they're truly looking for with this is time, as you say, and an injunction. So this filing by the USSF right now is the one that the NASL, to speak from an NASL perspective, really needs to get passed. They can't have this thrown out on its merits, because if that happens, then basically their Hail Mary has landed in the parking lot, and they're done, because they haven't even applied for D3, and they could operate as an outlaw league, but any player that signed for that would be committing career suicide. They'd probably get a few players, kind of your arena league guys that are just floating around, your semi-pro folks. But yeah, they couldn't get any quality players.
In my mind, it's about the money. If you just the word outlaw scares sponsors. Speaking of Friday the 13th here and scary stuff, if you're an outlaw league, you will drive your blue chip sponsor away. The Fly Emirates of this world are not going to come back. They're not going to sponsor an outlaw league. It doesn't look good for them when they're sponsoring PSG and other great clubs we sponsor a club in the outlaw league too? Yeah, no, that's not happening. So no, I think it's closer to 5 to midnight for the NASL. It's actually like a minute to midnight now.
Yeah, so again, the Hail Mary, what I think they're probably trying to do, at least initially here, is to get this into it, to have the judge say, okay, there's enough merit here for us to look at these causes. They're going to set a court date, which is not going to happen overnight. In turn, then the NASL is going to ask for an injunction to prevent the USSF from stripping them of the Division II status for the duration of the trial until the case is heard. That's likely their cause. That will give them another year. That would likely be what would happen. And then they would take that year to try and continue the fight behind the scenes. And as much as they like to draw battle lines, I suspect that the likely positive outcome for the NASL isn't a dramatic day in court that I think some of its supporters are looking for when they're standing at the steps and they're holding up banners against the USSF and they're we've fought the good fight and won. I don't think that day will ever come, but what might come for them is some kind of quiet negotiation behind the scene that allows them to exist in some kind of weird sanctioning bubble. And we've said this before, Kevin, that I again, who cares about these D2, D3, D4, D23s that are out there? Sanction the NASL to exist. If I'm the USSF, this is what, the USSF is just reacting to the NASL's actions. But what I think the NASL should be trying to do, and what the USSF should be open to, is sanction them without a label. This is a professional team that operates on its own merits. They don't fit exactly into our pyramid, but we're going to allow them to continue to exist because we want soccer to flourish in any market that wants to have it. And these are people that want to exist in this league, and we're okay with that. Like, we don't need to put them in the thing. Just say they're a league. And that, to me, would solve everything. But what do I know? I'm not a lawyer, but I badly play one on podcasts sometimes. Kevin, do you have any final thoughts on this mess before we go on and talk about games?
What happened this week? What happened the Black Tuesday? The fact that the United States are out of the World Cup actually is probably a terrible news for the NASL too, because then whichever courts say, if you are the USSF basically as a whole, now you're looking at the NASL, did he actually help the growth of the game since at least 2011? Were you beneficial to the overall health of the beautiful game between our borders? If the answer is no, well, maybe it's going to be even more difficult to get things done if you're the NASL.
Well, we'll continue to follow this as we do. All right, let's take a quick break. We'll come back with Games of the Week.
You are listening to Soccer Today. Follow us on Twitter at Soccer Today SPN and like our Facebook page, facebook.com/Sports Podcasting Network. You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.
And we're back, Duane. It's Friday. We have a lot of games this weekend. The penultimate match day in Major League Soccer, and just another weekend in the Premier League. Sunday, it's when it happens in Major League Soccer. It starts with the Two Solitudes Derby, Toronto-Montreal, and the presentation of the Supporters' Shield to Toronto FC.
Yeah, there was a funny article last week which sort of confirmed what we all knew, but
they're not going to be a guard. There won't be no guard.
This is not the tradition here, so that won't happen. And they were the TFC players were kind of having a laugh out of it. Drew Morser, I thought, was the most typical of it, and sort of speaks to why there won't be a guard, because Drew Moore is a sort of an American that maybe hasn't grown up with the tradition. Maybe was a guy that played soccer but didn't watch a lot. But the way he said this, he kind of looked puzzled and went, "What? Like, why would they do that? I wouldn't want to do that." So they're not sure it's going to do. It just seemed absurd. And when you think about it, if it hadn't been a tradition in the Premier League or the top level of English football for 100 years, it would not be happening now, because it's people like tradition and they're going to respect what happened in the past, so they'll do it.
We can barely have teams shake hands in North America without starting brawls. Like, never mind doing a guard of honor. What do you expect? You want somebody to make a leg trip? Nobody wants to see the champions fall down in a domino style walking into the pitch, So yeah.
Yeah, we also have playoff leagues, so they shake hands at the end in hockey, and that's always like, oh, this is the greatest tradition in sport, as they're like kind of mumbling at each other. But
yeah, kind of like wait till I see you next year.
Well, I was thinking that I watched I caved and I bought Game Center Live for the first time in 6 years, so I have the NHL package now on my computer. So
wow, you really wanted to see McDavid, eh?
It's more that I'm working this job right now, as people know, till Christmas time. I picked up some extra money, and I get home at midnight, and I'm like, I'm too tired to watch a movie or TV show, so I just want to watch something. So I'm like, you know what? I'll just watch archived games, and I'll just avoid the scores. So I've been watching a game every night. I've watched a lot of hockey. But I was watching the Caps play Pittsburgh, and I'm thinking about an honor guard while I was watching, and I could imagine what a hockey honor guard would look. They'd all have their sticks up in the air, and then someone would say something, and then suddenly the sticks would start coming down, and then a brawl. It'd be fun, actually. Maybe we should do that.
Yeah, pay-per-view. Put that on pay-per-view. I'll give you my money.
Yeah, that wouldn't probably go very well.
No, but there won't be any guard of honor for it. You've seen one thing that happened this week that we didn't talk about it with the entire United States thing that happened is Nacho Piatti from Montreal signed a new contract, bringing him to a full 2018 and 2019 season. We'll reassess in 2020, and now with the rumors, there's a feeling that he might actually sign another contract at that point to finish his career with the Montreal Impact. It's been talked a bit, but his salary won't be divulged, and makes more sense now when we're looking at the situation. If you remember, a few times the player's salary were out this year. We were surprised by Piatti's numbers that were below par what we expected. It's a lot bigger than that, but because of the wish of the player, his salary is not divulged fully. But Nacho Piatti apparently signed to be worth a top 5 in the so maybe a top 5 contract in the entire league. So talking about between 5 and 10 million in my, but it's not necessarily accurate. But if it would reflect the other players that are in that position, but Nacho Piatti 2 years in Montreal.
Yeah, well, we'll see when the disclosure comes out from the players' union, because Piatti is a member of the union and he won't have much choice then. But
yeah, like this year, it was only 450,000 that were divulged. So basically, the bottom amount they have to disclose is what it is. But in real life, it's a lot higher.
Murray Paulson has said that before, that if you look at the salaries that get released by the union, they're not always completely accurate. He said that before, and I think what he means is there's probably within the, it's probably technical stuff, but there's bonuses and things like that can get put in there that don't have to be. Yeah,
I think there's some players that are not necessarily in a at ease to divulge how they make, and it's because of personal situation. Some players that have their whole family with them here in the United States, it doesn't really matter if their salary are known. There's no necessarily repercussion in their country. If you're from another country like Argentina or like Brazil, depending on your family situation where they're located in that city, and if they're exposed to any outside influence, and then it's another situation. Maybe it could explain the reasoning behind Nacho Piatti not wanting his contract to be full out public.
No, sir. Yeah, I mean, there's Major League Baseball players in certain parts of Latin America really struggle with this. There's been some stories about that. Yeah, that there's in Mexico, they're subject to kidnapping, for God's sakes, like members of their family if they know how much they make. There was a great
organized crime, like Russian hockey players. Just ask Pavel Bure back in the 80s and 90s, and Sergei Fedorov. Like the Russian mob got involved into player contracts too in situations like this. So no, there is reasoning behind not necessarily wanting your full salary to be divulged. It just stands out of the lot for us because it's just few exceptions. But when you put yourself in other world situations, it's kind of interesting. It's kind of understandable too.
Yeah, we'll quickly. Yeah, I was mentioning Sportsnet. Stephen Brudd Sportsnet did a documentary on Roberto Osuna, the Blue Jays closer, that just sort of touched on some of that stuff last year. You can probably find that online somewhere if you're interested in that type of stuff. But to get back to soccer, yeah, obviously good news for Montreal and the Piatti re-signing. Such a key part to that team. That he is a player that you can build around for the next couple of years, I think. It's been a disappointing season, as we well know, and we've talked at length about for the Impact, but a little bit of good news to end the year that Piatti will be back, because had he moved on after this year, you would have had some struggle selling season tickets in the off season, I think. But at least now you can sell around the fact that maybe we had some injuries and we made some changes here and there, and if they do in fact change the coach, then they'll play that up there. And we got Piatti back, and he'll be front and center on all the promotional material in the offseason, Kevin.
Yeah, for sure. So the next games that we have, a few games that are implicating the standings, and it's more the final resting place of the team, I could say, in the standings.
Well, the East is, yeah.
The
East has been settled.
Yeah, no, exactly. So what you're looking at here is, can New York and Columbus change position? It's going to be difficult. 2 games, 4 points out of 5th for New York. There's a few other implications here. Chicago, Atlanta, they're close. 1 point behind for Chicago. Columbus, 50, still not out of reach of third spot. Atlanta will want to maybe fancy their chances to bridge that 3-point gap to get it. So basically, everything the teams are playing for in the Eastern Conference is who is going to get that second slot for the bye. New York City's got 3 points ahead of Atlanta, but it's not all settled because have you seen the differential for Atlanta? So imagine it's tied on wins, all right? An example, in 2 weeks, New York and Atlanta are tied on wins. And tied on points, obviously. So it goes to the differential. And goals scored 4. Goals for 68. The goal differential for Atlanta is plus 30. Only Toronto has a better one in the entire league with 36. But 30 for Atlanta. For an expansion team, that's an amazing goal differential.
And there's a lot of folks that are statistically inclined that will tell you that differential is a more important projector than points even sometimes. So yeah, that is something that certainly, well, it's not more important literally. I mean, in terms of predictive.
Well, if you're 30 or 36 goal ahead and scored and against, yeah, you didn't lose a lot of games basically, or the games that you won them by a landslide. That's what it's saying.
Yeah. That said, literally points is the one statistical figure that does matter the most, and they are 3 points down. NYCFC just needs the one win, so 3 points would be the magic number there to clinch that out. So it will be, well, I guess they need 4, right? So yeah, that would be the magic number.
Well, no, because if you only need like a 1 in a loss of Atlanta, because the point that you're going to always have left on the table is 3. So if you're Atlanta, you need to beat the Red Bulls at home, and you need to hope for either a draw or a loss by NYCFC to give yourself a chance next week to bridge that gap fully with a win and a loss of NYCFC. NYCFC is playing New England on the road, yes, but they're playing New England. Shouldn't be too difficult, but, next week, NYCFC's home game at Yankee Stadium, well, won't be at Yankee Stadium, Duane, because the Yankees are still playing baseball, so that's unfortunate for them.
Yeah. Well, what I was saying is that New York City FC's magic number is 4, because if they gain, if Atlanta drops a point and they gain 3, then they would clinch. But at any rate, it doesn't matter. They basically win, and they need to win. And Atlanta needs to win too. They both need to win, and that is a key battle, and it's the most important one there. Because what happens after that? You're looking at playoff battles, and I think that when you're Chicago still can overtake Atlanta as we see here, but I think that if I was to look at the playoff matchups right now, you're likely going to see Chicago play Columbus. That one seems the most possible, the most likely, the most one that I would bet the most on right now. And I do think actually, as much as we're looking at this, that New York has enough points has enough ability to get the job done and to hold Atlanta off. So you will probably see the Red Bulls play Atlanta in the playoffs as well. So this will be a bit of a preview of that game, and I'll be very curious to see how Atlanta plays in the playoffs. I know, Toronto fans will be cheering for the Red Bulls in that game if that happens, because I think they want Atlanta out before they face them. That plus 30 goal differential, and Atlanta, when they embarked upon this long stretch of home games, Wednesday, Saturday, and they started very well. My caveat to all that all along was that see how they do at the end of it, and that's nothing to do with their talent, nothing to do with their abilities, and everything to do with the grind that would have on them. And we've seen a couple injuries take place. We've seen them drop some points in the last couple weeks. So what I was suggesting might happen, I think, is kind of happening, and it's going to end, assumedly, if they don't get the bye, with another midweek game, and maybe at that point in time, they might have run out of gas, and it'll be interesting to see what they do. It would be fascinating to see what would happen in that final week if, in fact, the second place seed is wrapped up this week and they go in to play Toronto in that last week, and both those teams are kind of eyeing at each other going, how are we going to approach this? I think you'd see a very interesting game of chess that day if that were the case.
Now, the Western Conference, when we wasted 10 minutes talking about the East, when actually in the West there's some suspense left. Which of FC Dallas, Real Salt Lake, or the San Jose Earthquakes will get that 6th and last spot, giving access to at least one playoff game, at least a play-in game? 43 points for Dallas in 6th, 42 for RSL in 7th, and 42 as well for San Jose. Yes, differential and points and number of wins could be interesting because here, FC Dallas has less wins, 10 instead of 12 and 12 for RSL and San Jose respectively. Dallas has 10, but they got 43 points and they got a differential of 0. Real Salt Lake got 12 wins, but a differential of -6 with 47 goals for, which is 4 less than FC Dallas. So the amount of win, which is the first one, we'll give it to RSL. But if FC Dallas can win out, that it will be leading on point. But those tiebreakers here could be important between RSL or San Jose if they can get results, or Dallas. Dallas is playing Seattle on Sunday away, so a tough game for Dallas. But maybe if you're Dallas, you fancy your chance against a team where Clint Dempsey and the other prominent U.S. men's national team player on that team will maybe feel a little down. You'll have a Roman Torres probably still partying from qualifying Panama to the World Cup, and you're going to have your Seattle Sounders maybe ripe for a tough one against Dallas. But Dallas on the road to get a result, it won't be easy. But still, that battle, 3 teams still up for the 6th spot.
Yeah, the games, just list them out real quick here. All the East games start at the same time. All the West games start at the same time for the last 2 weeks of the season, and they've managed in the last couple of years to conduct the schedule so at least every team is on the same amount of games down the stretch, which is something that didn't exist before. So we don't have to deal with games in hands anymore.
The
West games are.
That's why Kansas City played midweek against was it the Dynamo? I think it was against Dynamo, and they're playing again this weekend. But yes, that's why it was a game on Wednesday.
All right, so Vancouver, you mentioned the SKC Houston game. That will take place. Colorado, RSL, Seattle, Dallas, you mentioned. Portland plays DC United, the only interconference match of the week. LA, Minnesota, and Vancouver, San Jose. Back to the playoffs. Yeah, it's a bit of a logjam there. MLS is going to play this up big and a lot. They love their playoff battles. Even SKC technically isn't in, although at 48 points, they need to lose out and have a lot of things go wrong for them to miss the playoffs. So you can pretty much you can put them in with a pen that has one of those bad pen erasers. That's what you can do with SKC.
And Vancouver, still 3 points ahead on top of the Western Conference, looking very, 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 very likely that they will have a bye in the first round of the playoff. So Vancouver, Toronto, best teams in the East and the West. It's a shock. We weren't expecting this in Vancouver, but consistency sometimes, and you get good result mixed in with some decent, and you have an entire conference that are not necessarily one amazing team. Every team is closer together. You get your shot at finishing first. You'll get a bye. We'll see what Vancouver can do in the playoff, but 3 points clear of the second, 4 points clear of third. It's looking like they'll finish at least top 2, if not number 1.
And they're going to want to get as many points as they can out of their final 6, too, because they can get up to what? They get 57 they could get to if they win out, which would probably put them ahead of 3 or 4 teams in the East, which potentially, if you skip ahead and think there's some upsets at the top of the East, you might be able to host an MLS Cup. You got to start to think that way when you're on the top there. But as it is right now, they would only there's only 2 teams that they would finish above of in the East, which is a complete flip of past years, of course, Columbus and New York. So it seems pretty likely that you can start to, if you need to walk to the MLS Cup final, if you're a West-based thing, you can start walking East now. You can just sort of figure it out as you go, which exactly. I would go Northeast if I were you, though. I suspect it's
head for the general direction of either New York or Chicago, New York or Toronto, and you'll be able to decide in due time either to turn left or right.
Yeah, you might have to, with the possibility you might get some sun if Atlanta does the upset run down the rest. But yeah, back to the West. It is a logjam, and I think that who I'll be looking for. It's impossible to sort of pinpoint one game. The RSL interests me because they were so far down the table earlier that stretch where they were horrific, that they had fallen to the very bottom of the whole league. They couldn't score. Their best players were teenagers, basically, that were away with U20 qualifying or U20 World Cup at the time. It was a mess, and then they've slowly turned it around there, and now they're right thick in the middle of it. They are outside the line right now, but if they get in, I would think that they would have the potential, because they are pretty hot in the second half, to do something, to have that true dramatic come out of nowhere run. I don't think RSL, I'm going to be so bold as to predict that they could win the West, but anyone that gets in there might be able to. So who knows? Houston's the opposite. They're kind of falling down the table after being near the top for a while. So that's the one team in there that I would suspect won't have a long playoff shelf life. Seattle, I've thought all season I've been saying should be the favorite, and everyone sort of looks at Seattle as the defending champs and says, oh, well, they should be better. But then you remember how they won the championship last year. And this isn't bitterness if you're a Seattle fan listening to this. This isn't a Toronto guy going, you only didn't get a shot on goal and blah, blah, blah. No, it's like you were crap for most of last season, got hot, got through the playoffs. Yes, you played incredibly negative in a final, which you had to do to win. That doesn't necessarily mean you were the best team. And what I'm saying about that is that we shouldn't maybe have expected as much out of the Sounders this year, and we're maybe getting exactly what they are, with them sort of floundering in the middle of the pack there and not yet even technically have clinched a spot, although I think they're probably fine. But the one team that most people I think will be looking at, Kevin, is FC Dallas. Can they squeak in? And then if they do squeak in, can they turn it back around, or is this just too far gone at this point?
Yeah, no, it's they'll maybe miss like a week. They'll maybe miss an opportunity to get 3 more points. But yeah, it's getting late, and we'll see how they can achieve it. But 2 weeks, Dwayne. At least, there's some teams still playing for at least either making a playoff or getting in position. But who knows? The fact that even in Houston, they have 2 terrible games, and it's not necessarily out of the question that they're going to repeat and beat Kansas City. You can find yourself out of the playoff really easily, and you never know what can happen. It's 2 weeks, and before this week, it was 3 points, 2 weeks, yeah. But since Tuesday, I'm actually convinced now anything can happen.
All right, quickly, let's look at the Premier League games. Obviously, the big one that a lot of people will be watching will be early to launch back up. Thank God the international break is over. Premier League is back. It's back with a bang. Those 7:30 games, they like to, well, they put them in early for a couple reasons. They put them early in the UK because you don't want to have a lot of drunk hooligans running around. So they figure if they have 12:30 kickoffs over there, that there'll be less drinking. Although it just means you start drinking earlier. But
it just means you wake up earlier. That's all. But Liverpool, Man United to kick off tomorrow morning. Back with a bang, we mentioned. United, one of the best team in the Premier League right now, going to Anfield against Liverpool.
Yeah, so that'll be the one that a lot of people will wake up early to watch. The rest of the 10 o'clock matchups, you've got City Stoke, Spurs, Bournemouth, Burnley, West Ham, Crystal Palace, Chelsea, and Swansea, Huddersfield. Crystal Palace, Chelsea should be fun on a different kind of level to watch. Swansea, yes. Huddersfield, will be interesting to watch to see how they continue, because they had a great start to the season.
They got brought back to reality by Tottenham 4-1, but Huddersfield away to Wales, away to Swansea, and I wouldn't be surprised if Huddersfield surprises Swansea. It's that kind of a game where Huddersfield does have some players back from international play. They were missing last week and a half. Well, they weren't missing the international break, but you do have that aspect of Huddersfield. It's back to their ideal formation, ideal tactics, ideal roster. And they have been playing maybe out of their mind, yes. But I do think that they're maybe a mid-table team, just the way they're set up. And I wouldn't be surprised to see them beat Swansea.
All right. Not quite a super Sunday, but we do have 2 matchups on Sunday. Brighton, Everton. Everton struggling, of course, at the start of the year. It'll be interesting to see how they respond to a team that they should be able to handle. Southampton, Newcastle. Newcastle, with a great start to the season, will they come back to earth? The Monday game, Leicester, West Brom. Obviously, the big matchup of the weekend is the only true glory matchup, the first one that started off. So that will be fun to get going. It's always an interesting sort of game on the schedule. It's the only derby that's not a true derby in the UK, right? I mean, that said, UK geography is a little different than what we're used to here.
Yeah, it would be like a super derby for us. But I'm going to pay a closer attention to Crystal Palace, Chelsea. Yes, it's a London quote-unquote derby, but Crystal Palace, they're terrible. Like, they're amazingly terrible. Can't score goals to save their lives. And I don't think it's going to get much better versus Chelsea. Chelsea have something to prove now after the defeat to Man City a few weeks ago. And I wouldn't be surprised if Morata, yes, there's the Conte injury. He's going to be gone for a few weeks. He's going to miss around 7 games for Chelsea. But it's not just about Conte. It's more about Conte. And it's more about Morata being maybe one of the, if not the hottest striker in the Premier League. He had a little injury, but Morata has been impressing me a lot, so he'll be interesting to see Chelsea play Crystal Palace.
All right. I'd look at the schedule for you folks, or the standings for you folks, but don't look at the Premier League table until Christmas. It's kind of pointless. Finally, Kevin, to end the week, our American friends have had a tough one, one that we're a little bit used to up here. So maybe we're a little more cynical, a little more jaded, I think is probably the word when it comes to stuff like this. A little pep talk for you. When it comes to the growth of the game, and I've said this in a few different platforms, I think I've said it on here before, but let me just repeat this to end the week right now. The game is going to be fine. We have seen massive growth in the popularity of soccer in this country, the country that Kevin and I are in Canada, over the last 20 years, despite the fact that the Canadian national team has gone from being irrelevant but okay to irrelevant and terrible, right? Like that, yet we've still seen the boom. We've seen the boom on the club side of things. We've seen more and more fans come to the game. We see the World Cup pack bars and pubs in this country to an extreme amount every summer that it happens. The Euros too, like it's a cultural event in the cities of this country that has not been impacted by the fact that there hasn't been a Canadian team in there. It's impacted the popularity of the Canadian national team because, there's not for a casual person that's watching the World Cup every 4 years and maybe the Euros every 4 years as well, there's no Canada to cheer for. Of course, there never would be in the Euros. Let's not get crazy here. But that said, even then, the growth of the popularity of the national team has grown with the MLS teams coming in and supporters groups forming and all that. So anyone who wants to paint this disastrous picture about what this is going to mean for the U.S. needs to really take a step back, take a deep breath, realize that there's no divine right to go to a World Cup. There's lots of ways to enjoy it. The sport will thrive. The sport will continue on. The sport is stronger than any one cycle, any one team, any one player, Kevin. That's my final thoughts on the week. We'll probably get back to focusing more on the whole world and less hyper-focused on the U.S. national team next week, because although we do cover them, it shouldn't be our entire focus like this, but this has been a unique week. On that note, I'm going to say goodbye. Thank you, Grant. You say goodbye to the show, Kevin.
And it's just a game. It's just a sport. It's not... who am I kidding? It's important. It is life. Sports is life. And we're all crying. It's fine. It'll be fine. In the now famous words of Charles Bone, he's fine. It's fine. Talk to you Monday. Have a great soccer.
You can find the podcast version of all the shows we do on iTunes, Apple Podcast, Google Play Store, TuneIn Radio, iHeartRadio, and anywhere you get your podcast.